Hello everyone! So, it's been a long time since I've made a video about anything, because I'm that guy. And I figured today I'd cover a little bit about Dolby Atmos, and specifically Dolby Atmos on headphones. The tools I will be using are mainly for Dolby Atmos music or for post-production, but they can be used interchangeably. This is just the idea. So in this case, I'm using an anime by Miqhell Laven, and this is the entire sound design, and I'm using Cubase 13. This is all in stereo. How I set this up is that I set the timecode to make a few extra bars, and then I start my 0th of my timecode on the beginning of the movie, and see, it starts on 0, and that's how you set it up. To set that up, you do that in the project settings. There are a lot of people who can show you how to do that on YouTube. If you're interested in how to set up for a movie or for a video clip in general, like for advertising, I can make another video on that. But quite simply, how I do it is I import the video, I set the bar to 0, and then I will go through the entire movie and set up sections where I think important things should happen. This is mainly for the purpose of composition. So if you're writing music for a video, this is just different sections where different parts of the music will be. And then I will do a tempo map, and then I just keep a chord chart at the bottom for myself for reference. So that's essentially the basic setup over there for a movie. And then I will have the different sections in folders. Yeah, you could do this in Pro Tools as well. There's no reason you can't do it in Pro Tools. In fact, most people do it in Pro Tools. But essentially, I have my global effects, which is just reverbs and delays. Then I have my DX being your voices. I don't have much voices going on in this, but that's okay. And then I have Foley, the different types of Foley that are happening. In this case, it's just mainly Kung Fu fighting. Everybody's going Kung Fu fighting. And so on. And then after Foley, I'll have SFX or sound effects. And sound effects is just the effects that aren't recorded, shall we say. They are just digitally synthesized ones, or impacts or crashes and things like that. And then you obviously have your Atmoses, not Atmos as in Dolby Atmos, but atmospheres. This is just the sound of the environment. So yeah, that's creating the atmosphere. And of course, once you have all of that, you can put all the movie sound together, excluding the music, and you land up with a fairly movie looking thing. So going from the Atmos into the sound effects will sound like this. And so on and so forth. Now, I took some Atmoses out of here and out of the end, and I've minimalized this as much as I can because you obviously have to make space for the music. So now your producer might get this idea that you need to transmit this into a Dolby Atmos system, and Dolby works a little bit differently. So let's go through the routing of this quickly and turn it into a Dolby mix. So quite easily, all these different groups are put into subgroups over here like you would in a normal movie. We have DX, Foley, SFX, Atmos, and the music sub. All these subs are then going into the submaster, and the submaster then goes into the stereo out. How I do it is the more, I would say, traditional way of doing it, is that I have all of these things in their groups, and then all those groups go to the master, but they're all controlled separately on VCAs, and the VCAs then would be my main level changers as I go along. Now, the director or the producer of whatever you're doing might come up to you and have this magical idea saying, hey, let's do this in Dolby Atmos. But what if you don't have a Dolby Studio? The first thing you need to do with Dolby Atmos is you have to take your stereo files and then take them out and start a new project. Now, there's lots of ways to back it up. This has already been backed up and all that good stuff. But in Cubase, the easiest way to do it is you obviously go to File. We are going to back up the project. And the reason we go to back up the project is because I want to show you how to do this from scratch. So we go into the project files where we have thing, put a Dolby Atmos mix, a new folder. For interest's sake, I'll just do it myself. Over here again, Dolby Atmos mix 2. I'll just call this example. And we are going to go back it up in here. Then it's going to give you a pop-up and say what you want. Now, because this mix has been finalized already, and we want to send it off just as a Dolby mix, we can minimize the files. In other words, just get rid of the things we're not using. We go to make our direct processing permanent. We go to remove the unused files, and we do want to maybe back up the video file. You could just re-import it from the original space, but I'm going to keep it in there. And then we are not needing the mixdown folder because I don't need it. So then you can rename this to whatever you want. And then we go to press OK. And then it will do the whole process of backing it up. Okay, so it's all backed up. And now you can see that we're in the Dolby Atmos setup movie. So what we have to do here is take this setup, which is in stereo, of course, and then convert it into the Dolby Atmos layout. But before we do that, I need to point out that if you're listening to this at home, please don't use your speakers because Dolby Atmos is not stereo. We don't use two speakers. We use a setup called 7.1.4 as the basic idea, which is 12 speakers, of course. And what I would recommend then in this case is that you should most likely be using some headphones. And the reason we're going to use headphones is because we're going to be working in binaural. And in this case, I also just need to point out, because we're working in binaural, I'm using Sound ID Reference. And Sound ID Reference is a headphone equalizer, which gives it a closer representation of what Dolby Atmos should sound like. But I just need to let you know that even if you do have this type of EQing for your headphones, most studios probably use bigger systems like 9.1.4, and you just won't get the right sound that you would get at home compared to a real Dolby Atmos system. But this is a good starting point for someone who wants to get into Dolby Atmos, and we can work in binaural to get this basic idea going. There are other headphone emulators and room emulators you can use. A very popular one is Sienna, which is a headphone mixing plugin. Do you need to use these things? No, you don't. But it does give you a little bit more of a controlled environment where you can make your sound more realistic, even from a home perspective, using any headphones. I am personally using Sound ID Reference because I have it. So, first things first, I'm going to get rid of the movie because we don't need it for now. And secondly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all these subgroups because we do not need them anymore. In fact, we don't even need the stereo master anymore. So all of these things we're going to remove. And yes, things are going to them. Panic. Scary stuff. So there's our stereo out that we're going to be using for the binaural mixdown. And here we're going to also now create the Atmos bed and the renderer itself. So easiest way to do that in Cubase is go to Project and then go ADM Authorizing. So we could go now to Setup Assistant. And now we have the audio settings and we have the renderer that we need to set up and the bed we need to set up. So first of all, it's going to say important. Your ASIO driver buffer size has to be set to 512 and your project sample rate has to be 48. All right, so before we do this, let's go through that bit by bit because I want to show you what I'm doing in this case. In my case, what we have here under projects and under project setup, we are already in 48 kilohertz and 24-bit, so we're happy there, but we don't know what our buffer size is. So to check the buffer size, we can go into your software of your interface that you're using and just change it. In my case, I'm doing something a bit differently because I am running OBS, which is capturing the screen, And I'm running all my audio stuff through Dante Via. Dante Via is a newer part of the Dante suite. If you guys don't know what Dante is, we can have a whole video about that if you're interested. But Dante Via is essentially a digital cabling system that allows you to move things that aren't Dante devices and create new devices for Dante. So for example, I have my SSL ASIO driver over here. If I want the sound to go somewhere else, for example, I want it to go into OBS, which is here. I have a loop back here for the playback. You can just drag across and there we go. So it's virtual cabling. It's wonderful. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into Cubase. And to change the buffer size is quite easy. We just go into Studio Setup. And your system will bring up the devices that you're using. In my case, Dante Via. And you just press Control Panel. And then it'll come up with your interfaces control that you're using. In my case, I have my Dante Via, which is going through my SSL. And all ASIO drivers will have this. So if you're using a Behringer or an M Audio or Focusrite or anything like that, you all have this kind of software built into your device. So we want it on 512. So we are ready to now turn it into a Dolby Atmos system. So we're going to go back to our ADM authorizing, and we can go back to the Setup Assistant. And now we have sorted this out. It actually indicates that you've done it. So my whole process of showing how to do it was pretty pointless because it actually does show you that you're fine. The renderer. All right, so the renderer will say information here, right? Just so you know, it's that the options in the selection will allow you to create the main mix channel with the renderer for Dolby Atmos plugin. Okay, so we'll see that in a second. But what we have is renderer for Dolby Atmos. We want to keep it in 7.1.4. But in professional studios, you would actually use the official Dolby Atmos renderer, which will give you more channels. And we're going to add the main mix to the render itself so we can actually play it out our system. Now we want to go down to the bed, and the bed will give us the bed group channels, which will give us the first 10 channels of our Atmos system. And we go to choose it from the bed configuration, and here we have 7.1.2. And in our case, our renderer is going to be 7.1.4 as a whole, but our bed is going to be 7.1.2. So what does that mean? 7 means 7 speakers around. So that's going to be front left, front right, center. Those are your first 3. And it's going to be back left, back right. That's 5. Then it's going to be side left and side right. There's your 7. And then the 1 is your subwoofer. And then the 4 will be the top speakers that you have. And the bed will take up the same thing, but it'll only have 2 speakers at the top. Now you could get the other 2 speakers if you set this up manually, but I'm not going to do that for this purpose, and I will show you how to do that in a different video if you would like me to, but I'm just going to leave it at that. So we are going to first then add the bed, and we go to route all the tracks to the bed channel. And we got to press OK, and it will automatically do this for us. So here we have the Dolby Atmos renderer, or if you're in Cubase, the renderer for Dolby Atmos. And we have several different sections over here. On the right hand side, we have our renderer output level, and this will just show us information about what we're doing in terms of our metering. And this is going to show us our LUFS levels. So here we have integrated LUFS. For purposes of, music mixing, we usually go for -18 because, things like Spotify have -14 for stereo mixes, and they are quite loud. But yeah, it could be louder, of course. You can normalize this in the process of uploading your music. You can check out my mastering in Wavelab videos to see how to do that process on something like DistroKid or CD Baby or so on and so forth. And then we also have our true peak level. Okay, so before I get to this part, we'll do the bottom over here. We have the audio objects. Now you'll see this yellow box going around the first 10, and that is our Atmos bed. You can actually see it's a standard bed, and below here it will say nothing because nothing's assigned to them, but these are the objects. In total, we have 128 objects altogether, but keep in mind that the first 10 are for our Atmos bed, so you have 118 that you can still use. On the right-hand side, we have the object view, which we'll go cover in a second. And then over here, it will show the different levels of the speakers' outputs, which is great if you're working in 7.1.4. Our problem is we're not. We're working in binaural because we have headphones on. If you don't, put some headphones on. And that's where this comes down, our trim and down mix. So on here, we have down mix. We want to down mix this to binaural because we're working on headphones, and you see that turn to left and right. So what I want to do is close this for a second, close that for a second, and we can now look at our output over there. It's the 714, and I want to put that in my master folder because I do, and I want to put the bed in the master folder as well. So we have now the standard bed, and we have the renderer. Now we did say route all channels to the Dolby Atmos bed. Let's see if it actually did it. I don't think it did. And no, it did not. And the reason it did not is because these were already grouped into different things. So for example, we have the percussion sub over here, and sometimes it just doesn't work. And to fix it, and I'm glad it didn't work, because I can now show you how to do it manually anyway. So let's take the drum kit, for example. These guys all routed into the drum sub master here, which would then go into the band sub, which we deleted. So we don't need that. So we can actually get rid of it. And we are going to clean this up. So take all of these, go to your router, hold Alt and Shift on your keyboard if you're using Windows, and it will quick link everything. Go there and go into your bed, which you want to do. So just go standard bed and go, okay. So now they're all routed to the standard bed, and we should be able to hear them. Wonderful. So they're all there. So what I'll do at this point is then I will go route everything except the effects into the bed, and we'll see how that goes. And I'll show you at the end how it worked. Okay, so everything's now routed into the bed. And we can now go into the Dolby Atmos renderer and have a look here. There's some analog noise coming through, that's fine. But if we press play, it's all coming through, and it's very loud because this has been previously mixed, so we'll adjust the levels as we go along. But the one thing you will probably notice is that we're only using the left, right, and the center. And the reason for that is because we haven't moved anything out of the left and right. This is all basically stereo. If we go and change the down mix to 714, you will see it here as well. It's very loud, so it's clipping and stuff. But there we go. So you can now see it is in the renderer, but it is not all around us, which is a problem for me. So let's go and fix that. Okay, so to fix that, you actually have to move things in the space. As you can see in the object view, we have no objects. And those objects have to be created. So quite easily, if we press play, we can mute the bed and nothing comes through. But if we turn it on, we'll hear everything. So we have to now take the things out of the bed and put them into the space. Otherwise, we're just getting the same sound we got before, maybe a little bit wider just because of how Dolby works. But if you take, for example, the kick drum, let's just go with the kick drum and have a look at what's happened. Because it's now being routed in the bed, you can actually now see the multi-panner come up, right? That's stereo because it's rendered down. The multi-panner comes up. And if we just play it, where the kick actually plays, you can see it's only coming out the left and the right, which is why it's only translating over here. So what we need to do is turn the kick into an object if you want to move the kick around. So for me, let me show you how to do that. It's quite easy. In your Dolby Atmos ADM authorizing tool, you can say, you can do it this way. There's many ways. There's another way to do it, which I'll show you later. But in our authorizing tool, we're going to want to add an object, right? So we're going to add an object, and we want to have the input of this object, the kick. Right, now you'll see that the kick changed some things, and I'll show you what they changed in a minute. But if we look at what it did, it took up channel 11 and 12 over here as our first object. Now these are two objects, and for me that is a bit silly. You are wasting an object space on a mono channel to create a kick drum. So I'm going to first show you how to break the two stereo objects into one. So I'm going to remove the kick drums as an object, and we can do this to the other instruments too, like the snare as well, but this is how you do it. So first of all, I bounce them all together, all the clips, using the bounce selection tool. We have the stereo file all together. You can press Control and right click on it, and then say find selected in pool. Click on that, and here we can right click on it, and we can convert file. We want to keep the sample rate, keep the bit depth, but we want to change the channel into mono and keep the file format. So we're going to press OK. And what it does, it will create them at the bottom. There it is. And we can now replace this file with that one. Keep in mind that this is going to be a mono file and the track is stereo. So we are going to drag it on and it's not going to work. So we'll have to create a new mono track and just re-EQ it anyway. I'm not going to do the snare because you know how to do it now. I'm just going to show you how to do the other method of creating new objects. So what we're going to do is highlight all the tracks. You go into your ADM authorizing, which I've actually made Control-Alt-A. And then at the bottom of the ADM authorizing tool, you can make objects like we did before, or the easier way to do it is to go to Functions and say Create Objects from Selected Tracks. Press OK, and it'll create the objects for you. Now you'll see that the kick is on channel 11. Just be sure that this is now a mono track, not a stereo track. Just keep that in mind. Right, so I haven't done the other ones, but now we can show you how the objects work compared to the bed. The bed is all around you. The objects are things you can place. So, for example, we have the kick, and the kick's in the middle because it's a mono. And you can now see that on the multi-patterner, if we move this around, it also moves around in the object view on the Dolby Atmos renderer. So, in general, for Dolby Atmos music, we don't want to go over the top crazy with panning. You can, of course, but you still want it to sound pretty natural, just bigger or wider than your standard stereo mix. So, for example, let's have the kick play in the middle like you do. Okay, I've also taken off all the effects. So let's go here and loop this area. And let's get the snare. And we want the snare in the middle too. Now the thing is, the snare is technically in the middle because we have left, right. So if you're working with two stereo files, you can bring them much closer together by changing the width to 0, for example, and then you can bring it back to the front. Now we have the kick and snare in the middle. And what makes Dolby great is now you can move this around however you want and put things in very strange places if you want to go crazy. So I'm going to put the snare on the immediate left. And now you'll hear kick in the middle, but snare on your left-hand side. And I'll move it around so you can hear what it does. Okay, so that's the basics of moving objects around. But there's a problem. Our main problem is that if we go put things in different places, for example, let's just put the snare on the left. This will sound very strange. And let's take the hi-hats and put them on the right. And let's put it in the right corner. Now we have this effect. Let's actually get to a part where they're actually playing hi-hats. That would be quite useful. Great. Now the crashes, we can do something interesting with these just because I think it'll be a lot of fun. On the crashes, let's bring the crashes, instead of having them left and right at the bottom in front of you, we can actually put them a lot higher. So let's bring them up. You'll see what happens on the Dolby over here. It will show that they are moving upwards. Now, we don't want to do this, obviously, in an actual Dolby Atmos mix. I'm just showing you the space of how it works. So that is panning. But there is an issue. If we check out this in 7.1.4 and we press play, or even better, any of them, we have nothing coming out the right side because there's nothing there. But we also don't have anything coming out the LFE. And that's a problem because if you're working in a Dolby Atmos room with actual 7.1.4, there will be nothing coming out your subwoofer, which is what your LFE is, your low frequency emitter. So if we look at the object, you'll see that there is nothing on here to send to the LFE. And if we go to the bed mode, you'll also see that we have the LFE over here. But if I press go, it does send to it, but I don't have that kind of control. I'll then have to open every single multi-panner. I'll have to open every single multi-panner and then adjust the LFE that way, which could be one way to do it. But it's also very annoying to do it that way. So what I do with the setup at the bottom in this area, what I'll do is I'll create myself a new group channel and I'll keep it in mono, but I'll route it to the standard bed, or I'll route it to the renderer itself. We will see. And I'm going to call this the LFE. Great. And we're just going to create one of them. Here's our LFE. So if we put the LFE there, for example, now it's in the bed. And we could say, oh, there's a Dolby Atmos renderer LFE over there. Let's select that. Instead of routing it to the bed, let's route it to the LFE directly. Surely that will work. So why don't we do that? So we have the LFE on. Let's go to our kick drum and send to that LFE. So let's just go LFE. Okay. Groups, LFE, and let's send. And let's just make it pre-fader, because what we can do is this. We can just listen to the kick and press play. Ah, it's coming into the LFE. But if we go into the bed itself, we don't see anything coming through the LFE. And the reason for that is because the bed is where the LFE is. The LFE is here, okay? 1, 2, 3. Well, let's actually put this in the right configuration. It's the 4th channel, which is this one, right? But we're not getting to it. Even though we've directly routed this LFE, it's not getting there. So how do we get there in Cubase? We have to actually create that LFE manually. So in your routing, your control room routing, well, just your audio connections, we can go to groups and effects, and we can see the standard beds over here. You can right click on it and you can say add child bed, but you can't select the LFE because it's not there, which is incredibly annoying. So add all mono child buses to the standard bed. And now we can see the LFE. Fantastic. So now if we go to this LFE and change the routing, you'll actually see in the groups under the standard bed, we can see the LFE. And now if we go to the kick drum and we turn this fader down all the way on the kick drum. Okay, fader's all the way down. It's coming through the LFE, which is great. And we can actually see this on the Dolby renderer. It's all there. But that does not sound like a subwoofer to me at all. What we have to do is actually turn this into a proper LFE. So to do that, we have to actually EQ this thing. So you can just get your standard EQ, and then I like to filter it 24 to 120. And you could filter out the other end as well if you want to get 10 hertz, but honestly, that will do fine. And then what I do here, I will get a limiter / compressor, and I will compress it to make sure that it stays very constant. So I like to use RComp for this. And what I'll do is I'll set this to -1. And I will put this on a 10:1. And I will have this a fast attack. And that will be that. So now, if I go down, it starts to sound like an LFE. And I can then set the level of the kick drum. And let's just do a bit of EQ on this kick drum. It sounds a bit flabby at the moment. So I'm going to go frequency and sounds really horrible. Just got to cut the really hard end off there. And then I'm going to cut out this boxy sound. And that's great. You know, not being too specific about it here, so let's get that. And let's get the snare in there too, just to get a balance. It's weird having the snare on the left there, but you get the idea. We now got a kick and snare. And we can obviously do whatever we want here, just to, you know, get it to sound how we want it. This is how you don't do compression. But you get the idea. Right, we now have our kick and snare, and we can now send some to the LFE. So let's get that LFE on and go. And you actually can feel that LFE. Okay, and you get the idea. So that's how you can set up the LFE. So now we've gone through how to set up your Dolby Atmos, how to route everything into your bed and into the render itself. Now let's look at something that is a bit more difficult to do, and that's going to be effects like reverb or delay. Things like compression are quite easy, because if you have something like a kick drum like I did here, you have EQ like normal and compressor like normal. And because it's an object, it's going through your whole system. But you have a problem now that if I, for example, create an effects track, right? Let's just make a normal effects track of reverb. Let's just get a standard reverb. Doesn't matter which reverb we use. Let's just use I don't know, let's use reverb because everyone knows it. And we call it verb. Okay, so we have a reverb here, And I'm now going to send the snare into that reverb. These are the old reverbs, so we're just going to call this one verb. And we got to send this into this reverb. Fantastic. Turn it on. Yeah, reverb. But there's a problem with this. The problem is that it sounds like it's coming through everything, but it is not. And let me show you what I mean by this. If I put this on pre-fader and I turn the kick off and I drop the snare level to 0 and just hear the reverb, which sounds very interesting. But if we go to the Dolby Atmos renderer and have a look of what's going on here, it's only coming through the left and the right speaker, which will sound very strange if you're in an actual Dolby Atmos room. So how do we fix this? Well, let's create another reverb, but let's change this effects track to 7.1.4 and say, okay, rooted into the bed. Fantastic. Verb. Surely this will work. He said with sarcasm. All right, and now let's go with the snare again. And let's send this snare into that verb. And it's on pre-fader, so let's see. So how could that be? Why is it that I have a 7.1.4 track here, but I'm using a reverb, but it's still only coming through the left and the right? It's because these units are only built as stereo units most of the time. This one and maybe all the stock reverbs as well. The thing is, these are built using impulse responses that you record, and you use a certain amount of microphones with this. In this case, it's only 2 microphones, be it true stereo or normal stereo. So this is now a problem for us because we don't have a reverb that can do Dolby, do we? So what do I mean by that? If you look at a reverb like Cinematic Rooms by Liquid Sonics, these guys actually allow you to do Atmos in 9.1.6 or 7.1 before. It doesn't matter. You can actually change the reverb on these things, which is great. So okay, let's go with that. Let's go buy it. But then you get to the real scary part where you're like, oh, it's quite expensive just for a reverb unit that can do Dolby Atmos. What about something else? Here's another great one that's slightly more affordable, but I mean, more affordable, €200, $200 for just a reverb unit. And then you have to think about things like multiband compression or bus compression, delay, and so on and so on and so on for the group channel effects. But these things become really expensive. So what do you do about this? Honestly, there's not much you can do about it, but I will show you a method that you can get around this. This is where we can now use a tool that has been around for a while with surround called Ambisonics. Ambisonics is a 3D sound space, right? Think about it as being in a sphere. You're in a sphere and the sound around you is one giant ambisonic sphere, whereas Dolby Atmos works with objects, as we can see. So instead of creating a reverb track in 7.1.4 or 7.1.2 to fit in the bed or whatever, what you can do is you can go and create a new track, and instead of using a 7.1.4, go all the way to the bottom to ambisonic third order. Now you get 3 orders of ambisonic. First order ambisonic has 4 channels, second order ambisonic has 9 channels, and third order ambisonic has 16 channels. Long story what ambisonics is and how it gets to that point. I'm not going to go into that now, but we want third order ambisonic because we have 10 channels. Now you technically could use second order and eliminate the LFE, but that's not going to work because you can't assign it to a specific place. So we go to say ninth we got to use third order ambisonic to get all 16 channels. We got to use our verb again, even though it's stereo. And let's just call this verb 2. Okay? And we got to play. Okay, so now we have the stereo going into verb 2. Let's now unmute it. And let's go here and go verb 2 and turn it on pre-fader. And now let's just get this all to the same level, give or take. And let's now play verb 1. You can see it's coming out the left and the right. And now let's play verb 2. So now we've created a new problem. We can see all the signal coming through on the bed, but there's no reverb. And that is a problem for us because we want reverb on our snare. So what do we do? The problem is this reverb unit will not work in this particular thing. So do you buy a very expensive reverb unit that can do it? No. You can use software that is designed for Ambisonics, and I'll show you one. I'll put a link in the description for it. It's called the IEM plugin suite. This is a great ambisonic set of plugins that goes all the way up to 7th order ambisonic, which we don't do, of course, because that is crazy. What this is a plugin suite that was created by the staff and students of the Institute of Electronic Music and Acoustics. If you don't know what that is, you should go check that out. It's quite amazing. And they've been very nice to give us a free open sourced platform. And you can change it as well. So what is this stuff? Is that it comes with encoders, processors, and decoders for our particular use. So the only difference between this and a normal plugin is that these have to be installed manually, which is a bit of a mission if you don't know how to do it. But they give a really nice explanation on how to do it on Windows, Mac, and Linux if you're into that type of thing. And you can check that in the documentation, the installation guide, and what's in here. So let me show you how this works. So back in Cubase, let's get rid. Well, actually, we made this first reverb, and let's just say we want that sound. So why don't we do this? We have our snare, and we go send it to both reverb 1 and reverb 2. So let's make this reverb 1, and let's make this reverb 2. And what we can do now, let's close that. And what we can do on reverb 2 is that we can go get rid of our verb. But what we want to go to do is go to the IEM suite. We want to encode this in the room that we want to be. They have stereo encoders, multi-encoders, granular encoders, and so on. Directivity shapers. If we just go check this out and play stuff, not much is going to happen at this point because it's off. Right. So there is some sound coming through, and what I want to do is create a reverb. So in here, instead of using a directivity shaper, I'm going to use a room encoder because I want this to sound like a room. And at the top, you have your incoming signal in 0th order, I guess, which is mono. And then it's going out as 3rd order ambisonic, which is great for us. So if we now play that, it's now encoded it into a room, and we can actually change the position of the room. Let's say we want it there, give or take. Okay, and what I want to do is imitate the sound of the room that this reverb unit is doing. So there's that huge sound. Let's actually get this to a sound that I actually like. So let's go room reverb for the snare, and let's put it on 1.5 second with a pre-delay of, say, that much. And let's filter out this low end. Let's just go with that. Or let's make it a bit smaller. Okay, there's a reverb. And what we want to do is match the sound. Just the sound. We're not matching the reverb time because we're not adding reverb at this point. We are just going to add the sound of that room, if you know what I mean. So you could actually take the time off of here and get that sound. Filter this out. Great. Now let's put in the time again. We'll start with that. Okay, so we got the room in there, and now what we can do is go back to this reverb, and now we can go back to the surround because now we're working Ambisonics. Go to the process, and we can actually EQ this to make it sound as close to that room as we can. Okay, great. And now on this reverb unit, we can then add the time of the reverb. So back into the IME suite and back into processes, and we can now go into reverb. And we can now say that this reverb, if we go look at the other one, we have a time. Oh, let's make this a bit longer. Let's make it 1.2. Let's get this to 100% wet and make this 1.2 as well. And now let's see what this sounds like when we swap them. That's that sound. Okay, we need to bring this guy up. Let's go for the toolbox and then bring the gain to the same level. Let's put this back onto 0. And this one is also on 0. So let's now see what happens. Okay. And now we can use the tools to match those sounds. And you keep going until you match the sound that you want. So now that we've got a reverb over there, we can just disable that. Let's now bring in the kick and the snare with a new reverb. And let's turn the reverb on post fader again. Bring this kick and snare together. And the reverb's all around you. So that's how you can use that particular unit to get a sound that is similar to the original stereo mix. So that is the basic idea of it. So now I'm going to jump over to the finished version of this. I will show you what is happening in that Dolby mix, and then I'll show you how exporting works. Okay, so we are back in the finished product. We're back, and now we have this finished product of a Dolby Atmos mix. And I just want to show you a few things that's happened. I've printed the whole thing, but that's a different story entirely. We still have the whole LFE, standard bed, and renderer. And let's now go and just look at a few things that we have. So kick, we have the kick. And if we go here, I have the kick in the middle, and I have the snare, and I have the hi-hats, and I have the toms on the left and right, and the ride and crashes and so on. If I go into the Dolby Atmos renderer and show you what's happening with just the drum set, you'll get the idea of more space. And this is still in a binaural mix. So you'll get the idea of space and how many objects I've used. And you'll still see that most of the drums are still far back. Okay, it sounds like drums. It's wonderful. And you can hear that that reverb is coming through. So if I go look at that reverb at the top here, which is a room reverb in third order Ambisonic, I have a directional shaper, which I thought actually worked a little bit better. And I shaped the sound according to the reverb I liked. And then I followed it by the reverb unit. Again, 1.6 seconds for a room reverb. And then I EQ'd it to how I felt that reverb should sound. And then I brought up the gain, because third order Ambisonics are quieter if you bring in a stereo signal, because that signal is being spread all over the place. So that is now the sound of that particular reverb. And I did it to all the other reverbs I had as well. I had a hall reverb, I had a room reverb, and a plate reverb. But where Atmos shines quite a lot is things like orchestras and, of course, with effects. So let's take out the band and let's just listen to the orchestra by itself. Get the idea. You can create a sense of a lot of space with that orchestra. So, for example, that swell that we have on the riser over here, you can hear the space of it, and you can observe it starting at the back here. See, all the objects light up when you use them. So altogether, you get this really big sounding orchestral cinematic mix, and it's a lot wider than a standard stereo mix. So let's hear it from this part again, and with the band, just the music. Okay, you get the idea that it's creating this big space around you, which I think is fantastic. Okay, so now let's quickly go then listen to how the effects have changed. So if I look at just in the beginning with the atmospheres, and we listen and we watch the video, I'm just going to put this on half size. And you can actually hear and see with the footage the wind moving in her hair from left to right. Which is great. I like that. And that is the basics of putting an Atmos mix together for cinema or for film. So once you're done, the export process is very similar to the process you would do for a normal output. Instead of in Cubase 13, I believe, you can actually go directly in here and go export an ADM, which is cool. This will go to the Atmos renderer, the ADM Atmos renderer, and you can just say export ADM file. You'll go to ask, we want it as broadcast wave, of course, that's standard, and then you would go export it as you would. But that is how you would create an Atmos mix. So now what we can do is do a comparison between Dolby Atmos and between stereo. And that's it. Thank you for watching. And if you want any more other things, leave a comment and just tell me what you would like to see. Whether it's Dolby Atmos, whether it's mastering, whether it's mixing, whether it's different tools in Cubase or in Pro Tools. So let me know what you want and I can make it for you.